a few seconds. It makes me nervous.
Please
work.
I'm just making sure the dog's not in the background making noise. He snores a little bit. Yeah.
It wouldn't be the first time. Sometimes my cat would jump onto the back of my chair while I'm doing an interview. That's happened to me twice, but she seemed to be asleep. Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Her name is Michele McPhee, and she wrote a superb book, which I read through. I really devoured this book. The title of the book is Mayhem, Unanswered Questions about the Tsarnaev brothers, the U.S. government, and the Boston Marathon bombing. I highly recommend this book. Right now on Amazon, it has 165-star reviews. There's an audiobook of it as well. And it is illustrated, so you get to see some of the characters and the subjects that are studied in this book. And it's also a Steerforth Press book. I've done a lot of interviews with really great authors, and I'll probably put some of those in the show notes as well. But Michele McPhee is a screenwriter and best-selling true crime author. She's a 5-time Emmy-nominated television investigative producer in Boston for ABC News and an award-winning columnist, as well as a contributing editor to Newsweek and writer for Boston and LA magazines. She wrote episode 5 of Showtime's City on a Hill in season 1 and continues to consult for season 2 while writing her first HBO pilot, The Beast, based on her reporting contained in an upcoming book about the MS-13 street gang. And she was really on site. I mean, it's interesting in the intro to this book, she was having coffee in the real location of where these bombs exploded on April 15th, 2013. And some of her other books are, where are they? She's written many other true crime books. So I highly recommend people go look them up on her Amazon page. I had them listed. I don't know what happened to my Amazon list. Here it is. When Evil Rules, Vengeance and Murder on Cape Cod. Also, A Professor's Rage, the chilling true story of Harvard PhD Amy Bishop, her brother's mysterious death, and the shooting spree that shocked the nation. Also, A Date with Death, the secret life of the accused Craigslist killer. Heartless, the true story of Neil Entwistle and the cold-blooded murder of his wife and child, and then also a mob story. So she has written many books, but again, we're going to talk about this book today, an excellent book. Mayhem, Unanswered Questions about the Tsarnaev brothers, the U.S. government, and the Boston Marathon bombing, published 2020. So Michele McPhee, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
I'm so happy to be here with you, really. And I want to just echo your sentiments about Steerforth. You know, it's a small publishing house with dynamic powerhouse editors and staff, you know, and they take a lot of risks. I give them a lot of credit because, you know, they're unraveling a lot of different narratives that I think people have become dug into.
And we talked about that in the pre-show about the killing of the young gay guy that was supposedly a hate crime, but he was like a drug dealer in Colorado too, right?
Yeah, there was some. I mean, look, that was a case that really, I think, mobilized a movement as it should, because if it was a hate crime, and I'm sure there were elements of a hate crime in that terrible grisly murder, but there was a lot more to the story, and I think that's what Steerforth does very well. There's a great story here about the Boston Marathon bombers. One is dead, the other is on death row. Case closed. Great job by police, and yeah, that's true. But there are still, as the title mentions, a lot of unanswered questions. And I really appreciate the Steerforth and its editors are like Chip Fleischer is fantastic. And so I just wanted to echo your respect for Steerforth.
Yeah, and you can go check out all their books that they have on their website. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And there is a lot more in the story. The reason I reached out to you is because I saw something where the Supreme Court affirmed the death sentence of Dzhokhar, I think is how you pronounce his name, Tsarnaev, the younger brother of Tamerlan. And so I really wanted to come back to the story. And you've really done an excellent job in getting all the facts together, because there was much more to this story than what I understood when it happened. But maybe you can talk about being in Boston on the day of the bombing and then how your investigation commenced.
Well, for me, one of the reasons I returned to Boston after a decade working at the New York Daily News as a police bureau chief, which means I worked right out of One Police Plaza. Phenomenal time. I loved the New York Daily News. I loved that beat. But after 9/11, and I was on the ground. So this is, you know, terrorism has been in the backdrop of my life for decades now. And I was on the ground when the terrible attack, that terrible morning of September 11th. And because I covered police and fire in courts, 343 firefighters died and 23 New York City cops and 37 Port Authority officers and an FBI agent. So these were people that, some of whom I knew very well, some of whom I considered friends. And to this day, there are unanswered questions about 9/11 that our own government refuses to reveal. If you imagine a world where we have 9/11 victims who are suing to get information and intel and classified records, and our own government is thwarting them in these efforts, and that to me is unacceptable. And so when I come back to Boston, on Boylston Street, Patriots Day is an amazing day in Boston. It's a uniquely Boston holiday. It celebrates the birth of our freedom, and it's a great day. The Red Sox always play. The marathon is always run. This is a worldwide event in Boylston Street. And that eerie photo that we're looking at right now, William, it's like, I still get chills from it. The abandoned baby stroller. To think about Boylston Street looking like Baghdad still haunts me. Imagining, puzzle pieces of amputated limbs on the street, the spot where an 8-year-old boy and 2 young women died. Like, this was stuff we don't see. You might see this terribly in Israel or in other parts of the world, but certainly not on Boylston Street in Boston. And having been on the ground on 9/11, this scene was so much more gruesome because we didn't see the bloodletting. It was awful to see people have to make that terrible decision to jump from the high towers, from the higher floor of the towers to their deaths. And obviously it was a terrible loss of life, but there wasn't the blood and the grisliness that we saw on Boylston Street. So it was a terrible day.
And it was amazing. Sorry to interrupt, but like a lot more people were injured than I had known. I didn't know that like 275 people were injured. Many amputees and pellets, and the bombs were designed to make sure that the skin was burned. So they were sophisticated weapons, right?
They were very sophisticated weapons, which is one of the reasons why I think the unanswered questions are important. The government says they don't believe that the Tsarnaev brothers built these weapons, which prosecutors described as designed to create maximum harm, and certainly they did. And I truly believe if we weren't in Boston, the death count would be a lot higher. It was amazing, the response. We had an emergency room doctor who was a combat veteran. He was a combat medic. He ran the marathon. Then he ran to Mass General to save the lives of some of the amputees. And in the end, 17 people were left amputees, 4 of them double amputees. And, the testimony, it was absolutely heartbreaking about how the youngest victim, who was Martin Richard, how he died. And his brother, Henry, this year just ran the marathon, which was a very beautiful story in Boston. And he ran, of course, in honor of his brother who lost his life that day, and his little sister Jane, who lost her leg that day. And the testimony was something that really propelled a lot of law enforcement and myself to get mad. Here's a little boy who his body is ripped to shreds by the bomb that was dropped by a smirking Jahar Tsarnaev. So when we want to talk about the death penalty, I think what a lot of people should do, maybe, in order to understand why the jurors felt the way they did, is take a look at the photo of suspect White Hat, as they call Jahar Tsarnaev, smirking. He dropped his backpack behind a row of children, including Martin Richard and Jane Richard. He's smirking at a tree. And when his brother detonated the first bomb at 2:49 p.m. Patriots Day 2013, 12 seconds later, Jahar giggled and set off the second bomb that killed that killed Martin Richard. And, the parents, the testimony was so horrifying because the dad talked about how he had to make this terrible decision to leave his dying son behind so he could get his daughter, Jane, to safety and save her life. And, another victim who lost his leg that day testified about how he heard Martin's mom, Denise Richards, who had shrapnel embedded in her own face, say, "Please, Martin, please, Martin, please, Martin," begging him to live. And in a moment of utter humanity, she saw that this man was also injured, and she turned and she put her hand on his back and said, "Are you okay?" And when I think about that, like, this poor woman, she's injured. Her son is, taking his last breaths, and she still turned and had compassion for another man that was from Massachusetts. And I think that those are the stories that I opened the book with, and I know you read it, William, and I appreciate that. But I don't tell all of the grisly details to horrify people, but I think I do it in a way to remind people that this is important and accountability is crucial. And if we don't demand accountability, then this is going to continue to happen over and over and over again.
Right, I totally agree with you. And can you kind of talk about like that day? The Tsarnaev brothers were known as White Hat and Black Hat, and you kind of start off the book with the bombing and then how the investigation developed, because they didn't really know, or well,
allegedly,
right? Certain different agencies may have known more than the local police. Would you agree with that? Or
well, let's start with this. I've been a reporter for a long time. You've been an investigator. The JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the Counterterrorism Unit had received information about Tamerlan Tsarnaev. If you recall, and this is kind of extraordinary in the current context of world, what's happening in the world, the Russians warned us in March 2011 that they had intercepted some pretty alarming text messages between Tamerlan Tsarnaev and members of the jihad who were in the forests, which is terrorist parlance for training camp. So Tamerlan was texting with a young jihadi, a mujahideen named William Plotnikov. He was this Canadian kid whose parents were desperate to make him Western, but he returned to Russia and he joined the jihad. And the parents of this Canadian called the Russians and said, please help us find our son. They pick up William Plotnikov, they grab his phone, and they see that he is exchanging text messages with a guy in Cambridge, Massachusetts named Tamerlan Tsarnaev. That information was shared with the legal attaché of the FBI in Moscow in March of 2011. And according to the FBI in Boston, the CTU, the Counterterrorism Unit, opened an investigation and interviewed Tamerlan and his family multiple times. In September, you may recall in the book, there was this bizarre, crazy murder. 3 mixed martial arts fighters, like these were strong kids. And they were, dabbling in drug dealing, and they were very close friends with Tamerlan Tsarnaev. 3 men found on the 10-year anniversary, and I'll never forget this. William, my source called and said, Michelle, it looks like an Al-Qaeda training video in here. It's a leafy suburban block in Waltham, Massachusetts. We don't know what the hell happened, but we know that there are 3 guys here nearly decapitated. 2 of the Jewish victims were mutilated sexually, and there were drugs and money left behind in this house. Well, as it turns out, Tamerlan Tsarnaev was identified at that time as one of the prime suspects by the victims' families, because one of the 3 victims, Brendan Mess, was his former roommate and a close friend of Tamerlan's, and Tamerlan would often describe him as his only American friend. They were seen at a lot of boxing matches and MMA fights, but he didn't show up at the memorial. And that raised some eyebrows, and families shared that with investigators, but for some reason, nothing happened. That same month, September of 2011, September 11th, the 10-year anniversary of the Grisly attacks, that same month, the CIA got a letter from the FSB saying the exact same thing, only worse. Now it's not only Tamerlan who is corresponding with members of the jihad in his motherland, his crazy mother Zubadat is also starting to exhibit signs of radicalization. And this letter said, we believe that Tamerlan is going to come to Russia and join the jihad. Now, this brings up the question, to go back to your very earlier question about the identification. If you or I interviewed someone multiple times in 2011 and you had an open case on them, wouldn't you recognize the guy? Let's start with that.
So. I would think so.
Yeah, wouldn't you recognize the guy? Let's add to that, Tamerlan had an arrest record, because, he was dating 2 women at the same time, one being his widow, Catherine Russell, Katerina Tsarnaeva, she lives under now, and another woman. And he was arrested in Cambridge for slapping that woman. She dressed too provocatively on her way to a party. He told her to change. She said no, and he smacked her around. So he has a police record. So, William, you also know we have something called FBI facial recognition that costs tens of millions of dollars. So the fact that he had a mugshot, and we had a clear picture of Black Hat, and we had investigators who talked to Tamerlan, Well, a lot of police officers did not believe for 1 second that the FBI didn't recognize this guy that they had an open case on. Then we go to a meeting, and if you listen to my podcast, mayhempod.com, you can get that podcast. Ed Davis, the police commissioner, tells a very compelling story because he's an honest and brave guy. And he said that he was at a command staff meeting. There were photos being discussed. They had photos Tuesday night. He said, why aren't we releasing these to my guys? We're going to leave my cops out there blind. Why are we doing that? He asked for the name of the Department of Justice official who wanted to keep these photos secret. He wrote it down. I think Ed Davis described himself as the skunk at the lawn party because he was very angry. And he said someone's going to get hurt. Well, we all know that on April 18th, someone did get hurt, and his name was Sean Collier. And he was an MIT police officer who was assassinated in cold blood on the campus of MIT. So the questions started right then and there. Did the FBI know who these men were, who these bombers were? And they didn't share that information with law enforcement on the ground, which left Sean Collier in a vulnerable position to be executed in cold blood 3 weeks from his dream job of joining the Somerville Police Department here in Massachusetts.
Right. And it's even a larger question as why the two brothers were at MIT as well. Like, what were they doing over there too, right?
Well, it's interesting too, because it's still questions I couldn't even answer. There was a MIT student who was a fellow Chechen who was supposed to be called to testify in the Jahar Tsarnaev trial. He vanished. They couldn't find him. The government couldn't find him. The defense couldn't find him. There's the former MIT employee, Daniel Morley. I mean, William, I don't know. I'm sure you read that chapter.
I did.
Something. I mean, is it not nuts that
yes.
This guy, Daniel Morley, is still walking around?
Yes. Especially with the unanswered questions. Who built the bomb, right? That's like the fundamental question. There's no evidence that these two had the skill to make this kind of anti-personnel bomb, right?
There's no evidence that they have the skills, and there's no evidence of a bomb factory except for in one place. And that place had nothing to do with the brothers. 55 days after the Boston Marathon, the Topsfield Police Department got a call about an EDP, which NYPD guys know, emotionally disturbed person. So there's a elderly woman climbed out of her bedroom window in her bathrobe. A short time after that, her companion climbed out of the bedroom window. Both of them had been attacked by Daniel Morley. And the mother described very, upset and hysterically about how her son had a meltdown. He was screaming, I've done something I'm going to have to answer to God for. He attacked her. He attacked her companion. They had to escape out a window. The police arrived. There's a very, very long standoff. This guy was threatening to blow things up. And they finally bundle him into an ambulance and they bring him for a psychiatric evaluation. The mom and the companion, her boyfriend, they give police permission to search his room. And what they find in there was shocking. Let's start with the fact that there was a 12-quart pressure cooker next to a bag of fertilizer, hidden in a bag in his closet with several sets of rubber gloves. There were signatures, actual signatures, the green circuit boards that we saw on Boylston Street. I saw them with my own eyes when the bomb squad was processing the scene. There were very similar devices. There were jars of BBs. And so, of course, cops are raised up. They call in the bomb squad. They evacuate the whole neighborhood. They pull over the ambulance and say, is this a live bomb? And he laughs and says, well, yeah, it is. So, of course, now people are panicked. It wasn't a live bomb, but it very well could have been, given the materials that were found in Daniel Morley's bedroom. Right. There were also videos of him making a laser detonator. There was all kinds of stuff. And remember, he worked at MIT in the building where Sean Collier was executed. And one of the things that police recovered in his room, that the weapons at the marathon were designed from Fagor pressure cookers. They're made in Europe. They're only sold at Macy's. They're not that, they're not everywhere. And they found a ripped box top to a 6-quart Fagor pressure cooker, the exact size and brand used in the marathon device. They found the box top ripped off, and on it was a scribbled recipe for thermite, which is a bomb accelerant. So it's an accelerant. So some cops ask this question to this day, and I can't answer the question definitively, but cops ask the question. We know that the Tsarnaev brothers that night were planning to go to New York. We know that they had other devices. They had another pressure cooker bomb and multiple pipe bombs and what they call the Tupperware bomb with them. Did they go to that campus not to assassinate the cop, but did they go there to get the thermite that perhaps the former MIT lab worker was making at his place of business?
Right. And they were on the run for 4 days, right? So there was a massive manhunt. I think you said you wrote the governor shut the city down, like there was a stay-at-home order. So somebody was probably helping them hide, or something was going on that was very suspicious. There's just all kinds of suspicious stuff before the final shootout where Tamerlan was killed, right? So it's 4 days of, they could have been doing anything. And they had bombs in their car too, right? They had bombs and pipe bombs.
Well, that's another interesting question because, if you recall, the night of April 18th was crazy. The FBI finally releases these photos at a press conference in Copley Square. I was there. We have armed and dangerous, suspect white hat, suspect black hat. Still uncertain why they just didn't admit they had an open case against the guy, right? So we don't know. But none of us know this, of course, at the time. Hours later, let's start with the beginning. Within minutes of that press conference, Cambridge police started getting 911 calls. And the 911 calls are, there's suspicious vehicles. Everybody is now in a panic. There's a manhunt. Remember, earlier that day was a complete chaos because the president, Obama, decided to come into town and have an interfaith service. Can you imagine the BPD? They're in the middle of a massive manhunt for 2 terrorists. Now they have to protect the president and every other dignitary from Massachusetts that arrived. They're all in one place, in one church. So you're looking for the terrorists and you have to protect this event, this interfaith service. I know they meant well, but bad timing, guys. We're literally in the middle of a manhunt and we're going to, add the chaos of a presidential visit with the 2 senators, the Secretary of State. You could have wiped out the whole government that day. But so there was a lot of chaos. They released the photos after the president leaves. And then the Cambridge police start getting 911 calls. They respond, and it's an unmarked vehicle with a ghost plate. Can you please give me a license and registration? They roll down the back window. FBI, beat it. Beat it. What are you talking about? So this happened multiple times where the Cambridge police had these encounters with unmarked FBI vehicles who were being completely uncooperative. And at some point during the night, a sergeant actually transmitted to over the radio, which is pretty unusual. These mother bleepers are here and someone's going to get hurt. And this is the second time someone predicted that there would be someone getting hurt because the FBI was around Cambridge and they weren't telling the cops why.
Right.
And to me, that's unconscionable.
Right. So there's no communication between these agencies, and it's really incredible. So the final shootout was like 200 bullets. People were going crazy. And Joe Zokar almost dies, right? He's found inside a sailboat or some type of boat in the back of somebody's house, right?
Well, it's interesting because, the podcast came out after the book. I became friends with a SWAT team commander named Jim Boglica. And Jim Boglica had also been on the Waltham Police Department during that bizarre triple murder I told you about on 9/11/11. So Jim swears, and I have the map. I think you might have seen it in the photo insert you mentioned, that day it was chaos. The city shut down. There's a stay-at-home order. There's this wild bomb and bullet battle. The Tsarnaev brothers were throwing bombs. Pressure cooker embedded into the side of a car. People who are watching TV in their house. One of them, literally, they're watching coverage of what's happening outside on their street, and a bullet pierces their television set, flies through the window, and pierces the TV. So this is really, really crazy. And Sergeant Jeffrey Puglisi, who's also on the podcast, an amazing story. He fires skip shots, which takes a very skilled gunman to be able to pull this off. But he fired under a car, bounced up, and hit Tamerlan. So Tamerlan's and I have the older brother, Black Hat. He shot 9 times. And he's still alive, believe it or not. and they're about to arrest him, and they hear the gunning of an engine, and somebody yells, "Watch out, Sarge!" And Puglisi has to drop Tamerlane's belt buckle because they have him. They're trying to get him. And next thing you know, they jump out of the way just in time for the younger brother, Jahar, to run over his older brother and drag him. Now, if you can believe this, Tamerlane is still alive. The ambulance driver describes how in the ambulance he was fighting them and growling like a bear, shot 9 times, run over, scalped. We've seen the grisly autopsy photos of how badly wounded he was, but he was still fighting in that ambulance until he was pronounced dead at 1 a.m. on April 19th. And what was interesting on his death certificate, and it's one of those things that bothers me, as it says right on his death certificate, occupation never worked. Because it was the entire family came into the United States and were well taken care of by the U.S. taxpayer. None of them ever had a job. You know, they got a free ride, like Jahar got a free ride to UMass Boston. Everybody was collecting welfare. They had a Section 8 voucher for that house they lived in on Norfolk Street. And William, we can go down that.
And that's another mystery too, right? Because he was driving a Mercedes, right? He was driving a Mercedes. Right. So you've thought maybe he was an asset of either the FBI or the CIA for some years. Like he was making money some way. Nobody really knew. He was supporting a wife and a kid, or supposedly.
Well, remember when we got those 2 letters from the FSB, one to the FBI and one to the CIA, Tamerlane and I was put on a terror watch list, partly because the Russians were like, we think he's coming to Russia. Well, guess what happened in January 2012?
He went to Russia.
Which, I mean, this raises a huge question for our Homeland Security, and the answers we're getting are unsatisfactory. How did a guy on 2 terror watch lists, now remember, one of the major recommendations, and this should infuriate everybody, one of their major recommendations in the 9/11 Commission report was do not allow people who successfully receive political asylum on the basis that they are going to be killed if they return to their homelands, travel back to their homelands.
With no passport, right?
With no passport. Tamerlane traveled on a green card. It's crazy. They never implemented that recommendation. Tamerlane Tsarnaev goes back to the country that his entire family said, we have to leave Russia because they're going to kill us. We're on a hit list by Putin. They want to kill us. And they went back to the very place that they said they needed to escape from. While Tamerlane is there, you know, there's a bunch of crazy stuff he was doing, like wiretapping his family. Because I don't know about you, William, but when I go visit my family, I wear a wire.
Right. Oh, that's normal. Wear a wire, wiretap the family, keep records on your computer of it. Sure.
And then the person he was wiretapping, who just happened to be the leader of a jihadist group, the Union of the Just, which didn't exactly, they sympathized with the jihad and maybe provided financial support. And the crazy mother, her cousin was the leader of the Union of the Just. And what a coincidence. When Tamerlane flew out of Russia, he got locked up. But let me just mention that before Tamerlane flew out of Russia, the day before, remember the Canadian William Plotnikov he was texting with? Well, there is a massive counterterrorism raid on the compound that Plotnikov and other jihadists were training in. Everyone in the compound dies. A Russian Interior Ministry officer dies. This is a very long gun battle that you can find video of on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
And who gets out of town the very next day? Tamerlane Tsarnaev, with a one-way ticket. And he breezes through customs without a passport, on 2 terror watch lists, returning from a hotbed of terrorism. And he looks completely different from the man who left the United States. He comes back with a long beard. Soon after, he's starting to wear, you know, typical Muslim garb. There were a lot of warning signs about this guy, but miraculously, he's suddenly on the fast track to citizenship that he's not eligible for because he slapped his girlfriend in the face.
Right. And it actually goes deeper than that because his father, who was kind of, he seemed to be like under medical care or taking like psych meds or whatever. His father was brought to the U.S. by his brother. So the uncle of Tamerlane, I forgot his name was
Ruslan Tsarnaev,
right? Who's married a longtime CIA operative like Grant Fuller was an operations operative. So he wasn't an analyst. He was in the field running operations. So there's
at one point he was like in charge of the DNI. He was the deputy of national intelligence for Ronald Reagan. This guy, Graham Fuller, is very famous because his claim to fame, and this is something he's written about extensively, so I'm not talking out of school, but he truly believed in the mission of arming the Mujahideen to fight the Russians. So he's been doing this since Osama bin Laden. And what is interesting about Graham Fuller, the father-in-law of Ruslan Tsarnaev, what's interesting about him is that he was the station chief for the CIA in Ankara, Turkey, which is exactly how the entire Tsarnaev family got political asylum. They went to Ankara, Turkey, and they all got into the country via a tourist visa initially from Ankara, Turkey. And if you look at the timeline, the whole family arrives in 2002, except for Tamerlan, who stays behind in Ankara, Turkey, with his uncle Ruslan and Graham Fuller for 6 months.
Wow. I didn't know that. I missed or oversaw that. Wow. So he was at 6 months in Ankara. And Fuller is like, yeah, he's, I mean, huge. It's really incredible. So he had some kind of
Fuller is all over this.
Yeah.
Even the house, remember, even the house on Norfolk Street that they lived in was owned by a KGB defector who was Graham Fuller's Russian studies professor. Is that a coincidence?
Wow, that's crazy. And there was also, I think, Zhokar went to school at UMass with another CIA agent who was there. It was
Brian Glynn
Williams. Yes. So yeah. Oh, it's just and
he was
actually
supposed to testify, but he never showed up.
Yeah, and then they were. I think Fuller went to RAND, so he was research and development type stuff, like real high end intellectual. I didn't know that he had a 6-month relationship.
Well, I'm sorry, I get so excited about this, but you know that Brian Glynn Williams was given a speech in Russia, and according to Russian intelligence reports, Tamerlan attended that speech in Georgia.
Wow.
And it was put on by an umbrella of Jamestown, which we all know is,
Jamestown Foundation, right? Yeah. Oh, wow. It's really mind-boggling. His background was really incredible because Tamerlan was a Golden Gloves winner, right? He was an American citizen, but he was a really skilled heavyweight fighter.
I think that's what we need to look at when we look towards motive. Why would he do this? Because on paper, let's look at he's an intelligence officer's dream. He provided good intelligence. Let's be real. We know that he was a member of a very controversial mosque with it was started by a convicted terrorist. And then there were a slew of convicted terrorists who moved through this mosque, including Lady Al-Qaeda, Afia Siddiqui, including, the spokesperson for ISIS, who was taken, Ahmad Abu Sama, who was taken out in a drone strike. So the mosque that Tamerlan was attending, many believe as a mosque crawler, reporting on, because he would create a commotion and then report on who came to him and agreed with some of his radical ideals. Then you look at what happened in Russia. Those men, William Plotnikov and his compatriots, they were horrible human beings. These were people that were killing civilians left and right, blowing up police officers. They would blow up a train. So the people who died in Russia, I think counterterrorism officials were definitely celebrating that mission. And then he comes back here and he is desperate to become a citizen. We know this because he participated in a photo essay called Willed Box for Passport. He wanted to fight for the U.S. in the Olympics, and he probably could have. He was a very skilled boxer, as you mentioned, heavyweight champ, twice of the Golden Gloves, but he couldn't fight for the U.S. because he wasn't a citizen. So I think that he had a lot of motivation to become a citizen. I think he was promised citizenship, and I think when he got back from Russia, he got a letter saying, hey, congratulations, your oath ceremony is going to be October in 2012. He shows up. Oh, no, sorry, we have some paperwork snafus. He went to the USCIS building numerous times thinking he was going to walk out of there a U.S. citizen, and there was some sort of snafu every time. The final time was in January, and we know that in January 2013, just weeks before the bombing, we know that he had a full-on meltdown in that office. He demanded a name change application. He changed his name to Muaz, which was the name he was using in Russia, his undercover name. He changed it officially to Muaz, stormed out of there, And we all know what happened on Patriots Day 2013.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. So he selected that day specifically as kind of like, anti-American thing because it was a super patriotic day in Boston, right?
I mean, who knows what's in his mind, but it certainly seems like, look, my grandfather used to always say, if you go to a barbershop long enough, you're going to get a haircut. And I think that Tamerlan was straddling these two worlds. When he arrived in the U.S., he was just like what we would call a Eurotrash kid. He hung around on Newbury Street. He dressed flashy. He dated girls. He smoked a lot of weed. And then suddenly he's attending this radical mosque that has known associations with terrorism. He's wiretapping his family members who are promoting terrorism. He's spending a lot of time with crazy people who believe in the jihad, like his mother. So who knows? I think he felt betrayed. I think many people believe, and that he could have felt betrayed, that he didn't get his citizenship as promised. He felt like he earned it. And when he left Russia, Doko Umarov, who people might know as the Russian Osama bin Laden, he had like a Drudge report, a terrorist portal called Cavcats. And Cavcats had a report about that raid that killed William Plotnikov in Udmurtia. And the report said that the aggressors were led to this house by an informant. So in Russia, they're talking about an informant. Tamerlan beats beat, in the words of Congressman Bill Keating, and leaves town right after this raid. And so I wonder if he's sitting around knowing that his own family knows he's an informant. He's sitting here, he's waiting for his citizenship, and in his mind, he keeps getting, jerked around, and he's not getting what he was promised. And I think he just got increasingly angry. But we'll never know this, because I think the most important thing, and this is the thing that I remain apoplectic about, is that the FBI refused to cooperate with congressional investigations. And that's the big overarching part of this. How is it possible that FBI officials can ignore congressional subpoenas in classified and unclassified settings? And if you listen to the podcast, you can hear the outrage. When was the last time you had Michael McCall, a Republican, and Bill Keating, a Democrat, agree on anything? These men were furious. They were furious. They say, this information does not belong to the FBI. It belongs to the American people. It got so bad that a bipartisan delegation of federal lawmakers had to go to Russia with Steven Seagal from Hard to Kill, the actor. With Steven Seagal had to bring our lawmakers to Russia, where they returned saying that the FSB gave them more information than the FBI. That's unacceptable.
Wow. It is unacceptable. It's a really incredible. And what's your position? Like, there's a lot of rumors around the internet that this was kind of like a staged event, or that these are actors. It's not. These people were really injured.
That is the most asinine. You know what's sad about that? It really makes me angry, because look, first of all, I know the victims personally. So it's ridiculous. Right. I don't even want to say it out loud. It's so dumb. Yeah. It is so dumb. It makes me angry. But the reason that people are not looking at this case more diligently, I think, is because of that nonsense.
Interesting.
I really think that you get lumped in if you ask real questions. It's immediately like tinfoil hat conspiracy stuff. And this is not a conspiracy. This is, as you can see, every single thing in my book is documented. Right, yeah. Every single thing I say in my podcast, you can go to mayhempod.com and look at the evidence yourself. This is not some nutty idea.
Right. No, I mean, you have it very diligently researched and footnoted. Even I was surprised you had a footnote of you talking to Graham Fuller. All that stuff is in there in the back, so people can go through it. It's mayhempod.com as your podcast, right?
Yeah, that's it. Mayhempod.com.
I mean, it's an amazing book. I really enjoyed reading it. I mean, I really, like I said at the intro, I devoured this book. It was fascinating. And there was a lot of these elements that I didn't know. And unfortunately, I think some of that internet rumors bled into my mind. So this was much more clear-headed, clear thinking. So I really got a grasp on this.
Well, you're not the only one, but I'm just going to say, I'll just put it to bed like this. I know these people personally. I've become close friends with several of the amputees, and there is nothing fake about the pain and the suffering that they go through. I've seen the x-rays of Mark Fucaril, whose body is still festooned with BBs that seared into his flesh. You know, it's just the pain and the suffering that I was there. I mean, I literally saw it with my own eyes. So when people make those allegations, I become incensed because it's just stupid, frankly. It really is. And the stupidity of it is just diminishing the real questions that need to be answered by the FBI.
Right. I mean, good point. I think that's a great way to end it. And where's the best place for people to get the book? I know there's a book, Kindle version, and audiobook. So people have choices, right?
Yeah, they have choices. You can get it anywhere at Amazon or Barnes and Noble. I'm always happy to answer questions if people dig through the evidence and say, hey, well, what about this? You know, you can call me out. A friend of mine who's a retired CIA officer, John Woodward, he teaches at the Pardee School, which is the intelligence school largely for military officers, and he assigns this book. And one of the things that he has his students do is do a critique. And so I'm always happy to answer the unanswered questions. And those students have been great because they've dug into things that I didn't think of.
Oh, interesting. And your website is your full name, right? Michele McPhee, MicheleMcphee.com. Is that the best place for people to reach out to you, or is it Twitter?
Twitter is probably the best. At Michele with one L, Michele McPhee, McPhee. And I am responsive. I really try to get back to people. Everybody has a right to ask the questions that they still linger in their minds.
There's a lot of open questions. I mean, there's a lot of, I doubt that they did it alone. Do you pretty much believe that they intentionally did that? Like they weren't running some operation or patsies or anything like that, that they meant to?
No, I didn't. I absolutely positively believe that those two brothers, I mean, look, as much as Jahar has been painted as this poor little victim, the hapless, intimidated by his older brother. We all saw the Rolling Stone magazine that heroicized him, and we've seen the stories that lionize him. No, this is a heartless punk who smirked. The same way he smirked behind that tree when he dropped the bombs behind children is the same way he smirked through the trial. Think about this. When he got the COVID cash, Jahar Tsarnaev got a COVID relief check on death row at ADX Supermax. Wow. So he has gotten so much money. For some reason, his own defense attorneys are sending him money. I can't get the answer to that question. But he's gotten so much money from his little fangirls. So the government is trying to seize his money, and you learn, interesting things. He's suing us. So think about how much money we're spending on this case. His trials are so expensive, the cost is under seal by the court. Wow. The district court has sealed the cost of both of his trials. The cost of his ongoing appeal is sealed. Wow. Sealed. And the cost of him suing us because the prison took away his white baseball cap because he was being disrespectful, and the prison officials believed, by wearing a cap exactly like the one he wore when he attacked Boston on Patriots Day. So he sued. He sued because he's sad he can't mail his hobby crafts to his lawyers, which to me is a conflict of interest. The lawyer should not be getting memorabilia from a murderer.
From a mass murderer, right, or a mass injurer. I mean, they were on a killing spree. They killed probably more people should have died. It really was. I mean, it's terrible that 3 people lost their lives, but it really was miraculous that all those people's lives were saved. It was a team effort, so it's really incredible. That's an incredible part of the story. It's a great book. I highly recommend people go get this book. Title of the book again is Mayhem: Unanswered Questions About the Tsarnaev Brothers, the U.S. Government, and the Boston Marathon Bombing. And the author is Michele McPhee. So, Michele, thank you so much for your time.
William, thank you so much. This has been absolutely lovely. And I love, William Ramsey Investigates. You guys, you really dig in, and I like it.
I try to. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much. Stay there. All right. Cool. So I'll put all that stuff in the